All right, let's go live. Let's learn. I don't know who's going to come tonight. It's holiday, but let's see. We are live, and we're going to continue the laws of the meal. Kitzur, here we go. Live, and we're going to. Hey, Rebecca. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. I believe we're holding Sif 15, 15th law, halacha 15. So we're talking about making Kiddush by night before we eat and by day before we eat. And we said it has to be b'makom suda, a place where you can't just make Kiddush without connection to a meal. It has to be by meal. It doesn't have to be a full meal. There's if you are not ready for the meal yet, hey Ariel, then it could be connected to even if you have to make a mezonot, which is like crackers or cookies, or even a revius of wine, but there has to be some sort of setting of a meal for the Kiddush. Now the question is, and this is Rebecca, you brought this question up before, of mutar litoim achar tefillah shachris koden tefillah musaf. Let's say this is the law that is very much connected to the Kiddush club, right? Once one davens shachris, meaning the morning prayer. So we know we do the morning prayer, then we do the Kriya, the reading of the Torah, the Haftorah, and then afterwards, if there's a rabbi speech or not, afterwards is the Musaf, which is again all the davening, all the prayers is corresponding to the sacrifices in the temple. When there was a special day like Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, or most of the holidays, there was a special sacrifice that was sacrificed. That was the Musaf sacrifice that was connected to the Musaf means from the word hoisafa, to add. So it was the additional sacrifice that was connected specifically to either the Shabbos or the holiday, as opposed to the Tamid. The Tamid is the consistent sacrifice that we did every morning and every afternoon. Therefore, we have the morning prayer and afternoon prayer, and for the intestines that were burnt at the end, we have the evening prayer. So the Musaf is the fourth prayer, the middle fourth prayer, which is the addition connected to the holiday or the Shabbos. So can a person who's davened already the morning prayer, has not yet davened the Musaf, and the tradition is that we daven the Shachris and Musaf in the same setting, it means Mincha, we go home and then we daven Mincha, but we daven the Musaf right after Shachris. But what happens if you want to taste, want to have food in between? So you've already davened Shachris, heard Kriya, and not yet davened Musaf, which is most of the people that join the Kiddush club, or other reasons, is mutalitim achram Shachris koyin feels Musaf. One's permitted to taste, to have something. The word litoim, as opposed to le'echol. Le'echol would mean to have a full meal. Litom is to taste something. So you could taste something before Shachris, after Shachris, after the morning prayer, before the Musaf. But he adds to that. Uti'ima hainu paske beitza means don't eat more. Now you're even allowed to wash, but don't eat more than an egg's amount of bread, which is the amount a person has to eat on Shabbos. Of the bread is not a kazais, but a person has to eat an olive. But an olive is obviously a lot smaller than an average chicken egg. But it has to be, you can eat up to an egg's worth of bread, so you shouldn't eat more than that. Or peiros, but if you want to eat fruits that's not hamotzi, not bread, afilu harbor, then you could eat as much fruit as you like. I'm assuming the same would apply to vegetables. Elisa desalev, to calm the heart. So if you're hungry, basically, and the lecture is going long or the musaf is going long, one can eat after the shachris, not too much, not a meal, but eat enough to satisfy your hunger. And in such a case, you would have to make Kiddush first, which is what we do. Drink, like we said, a swallow, which is one sheikful, and an additional revius to make the setting of a meal. This is a Kiddush in the place of a Suda. We have to assume that when he's saying this, he means in the case that you're not going to wash and eat bread of a kabetza. If you're eating bread of a kabetza, I'm assuming that would be enough for not to drink the second revius of wine. But he says in the case that I guess in the case of fruit, then you could have the extra revius, which is we said about 3.8 or 2.8 millimeters of wine. So he says, or to just have the wine of Kiddush, and then to have one of the 5 grains, which would mean obviously either to make a mazonos, a cake or crackers, or to eat up to an egg's worth of bread. Okay, so let's see so again, what we learned from this law is that you're allowed to eat after Musaf, make Kiddush, even though it's not a full Suda, but you could make either have mazonos or a small amount of bread. You should not eat a full meal before Musaf, because you should have a Musaf and then have your meal. But if you're hungry and you can't wait and you're antsy, what have you, each person, or you need to eat, so obviously this is what you should do. Okay, footnote number 62 is okay. Because a kibetza is just the amount of okay, just reference. Law number 64 says in a time that sometimes if we have to, for instance, I'll give you an example. When it comes to Pesach, so Pesach we don't have mazonos. No, there's no mazonos. There's no cake. Even if you have Pesach cake, if you have to make a mazonos, that means so most Pesach cakes are shahakol, unless you eat gebrachs. But most Pesach cakes are shahakol. So if you're not going to wash and you want to have kiddush, let's say in a kiddush club or in the kiddush in the shul, like we have in our shul, where people walk 20, 30 minutes, so they want to drink something before they go home. So you would have to drink a cup of wine for kiddush, and then an additional revi is to make a makom suda, because you have nothing to make a meal setting with just fruits and vegetables, or even Pesach cake. But again, this is only the case that your Pesach cake is not mezainis. If you're eating with grains, then it's a mezainis, then you would have a meal. So he said that when a person must, you could use an additional amount of wine to make the setting of a meal. So he says, Shulchan Aruch-Chapter, this is the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, hold on, Rebecca, rules that in the time of need, you can rely on drinking only a revius. So only a revius of wine is enough to make it a meal. Okay, yes, Rebecca.
I think maybe I missed something. So you make Kiddush on wine or grape juice on Pesach, and then you could have like something that's like Hadama or Eitz or Shahakol, because like you said, there isn't really Mazonos. It's either like those brachas I just said or Hamotzi.
Yeah, so the thing is that the if you're having let's say a kiddush, let's say in my case we walk 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it's hot, or you're long and you're tired and you want to drink something. So you have to you can make kiddush, but you have nothing to make a suda on. Even the vegetables and the fruits or whatever you have is not going to be, unless you wash, is not going to be a meal. So in regular weeks, meaning non-Pesach weeks, you would just have some mazonos, like most kiddushes have, right? You have kiddushim have crackers or cakes or cookies, whatever.
Right.
So in the case of Pesach, what you have to do is drink an additional revius of wine. You have to have a suda. So you have to make kiddush in a makam suda, that we've discussed. So the makam suda could be in a case of need, you can use an additional amount of wine, which is a revius wine you drink on top of that, on top of the kiddush. So you drink it's not that much. Revius is I think, let's say about I think it was 3 millimeters we said of wine, and that would be the meal that you establish the kiddush on. But you can't just hear kiddush, eat fruits, and go home or whatever.
Wait, so is it better to have something that's like Shahakol? Because like Pesach cakes and crackers and things are Shahakol often. Is it better to have something that's Shahakol or Hadama, or to wash and make motzi?
But most people won't wash. There's just not that kind of setting of sitting down with matzah and watching and benching. And also he doesn't want, if it's after Musaf, you could wash, you could do as you like. But most people are not going to do that. So it's easier to do a revius of yain. an additional of wine. Let's say in this shul, they're not going to offer you matzah. I mean, not every time that people are going to make it available for you to wash. So, and you also may yourself not want to wash and do benching. You just want to have something to drink. So you do is have a little extra grape juice or wine, and that would be your meal. And then you could have the fruits and vegetables, shahakal, Pesach cakes, whatever.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Now I say this: Call Adam, every person, Yisrael, Bein Isha, whether it's a man or a woman. I mean, this is not just an obligation for the men. Chayavim le'echel b'Shabbos shalosh sudos is obligated on Shabbos to eat 3 meals. Every Shabbos, one is to eat 3 meals. Echad v'layla, the first meal we eat at night, which is Friday night. Ushtayim b'yom, and the other 2 are by day. The morning meal after davening with the Kiddush, and what we call is known as shalosh sudos, the third meal, which is usually eaten after mincha. And one's obligated to eat at each of these 3 meals bread. Even on the third meal, which usually some people may be a little more lenient, one should specifically eat bread. Again, I'm going to get into other minhagim, but this is the way it's written in Shulchan Aruch. There's verses for this, based on the 3 times it says hayom by man. When a person washes their hands and makes the bracha, how much should you eat on Shabbos of bread? One has to eat the egg amount of bread. So you can't just have a kazayis. You have to have a kibetza. It means the biblical obligation, it says in the Torah, v'chalta v'savata uvirachta, right? So we know that the blessing after bread is biblical. All other blessings are rabbinic. The blessing after bread is biblical. It says v'chalta v'savata, eat, be satisfied, uvirachta, and bless God. That's the basis of the biblical obligation of the blessings we make after the bread. That means that we know it as benching, right? That which is made up of 4 blessings: the first blessing, second blessing, the third blessing of Uvnei Yerushalayim, and the fourth blessing Atov V'Meitiv. Now, the halachic is you have to, based on the verse biblical, you have to be savat, you have to be satisfied. It means you have to be full. I mean, not full, but you have to be satisfied. To eat a little bit and you're not satisfied, biblically you wouldn't have to make a blessing after blessing of bread. So with the rabbis made it that we're careful even up to kazayis. If you eat a zayis, which is an olive amount of bread, then already we bench. There's a whole medrash that God says that one of the reasons we have the blessing of the birchat kohanim, Yisa Hashem panav elecha, God turns His face to the Jewish people, is because we make a blessing on the bread for only after kazayis. So it means we're not full. Now, that's the obligation of blessing, of eating and blessing. What about the obligation of eating on Shabbos? That's not the amount of an olive, it's the amount of an egg, which is more, obviously. So a person should eat at least the amount of an egg for each of the 3 meals. Therefore, he says, L'chein yizar kol adam, person should be careful. What happens sometimes, especially in a winter Shabbos, where one eats either a late lunch or a long lunch or a large lunch or all of the above and has no appetite to eat the third meal. So he says that one should not behave that way. One should not eat too much in the second meal, I mean the first meal in the morning, to make space for the third meal after mincha, especially again if you're dealing with a situation where it's a short Shabbos, a winter Shabbos. So you should be able to eat the third meal, meaning to say, because you have to eat an eggs amount, which is more than a kabetz. So now we know that more than a kazayis. So then it's more. So therefore, one has to eat. Let's say you can't eat bread; it's just not going to work for you. You should eat other cakes, paskisan is kind of case, or other foods made of the 5 grains that you can make on it, the mizonas, which is a higher level of food than a shahakal, than let's say liquids or fishes or meats. Something of the grains is more is more unique and special to honor the third meal with a mazonas. Shunikra mazon, it's also considered mazon food. Vim gam zaisi efshalai, and if that, even that, the person can't eat from the 5 grains, as it means the mazonas. I'd eat at least something that you use as like a spread, something that's used as a byproduct to eat with bread. So it's connected to bread. Kegain basar v'dagim means something substantial, meat or fish, kayetzevet. V'im gam zaisi efshalai, if let's say you can't eat that, is yecha kapanim paris and v'shalom, at least eat cooked fruits or vegetables. Now he says, when do we eat the third meal? From when the mincha gedola starts, which is anytime after we start davening mincha. From 6.5 hours after the hour. So we said a day hour is 12 hours, and again, it's not dependent on winter or summer. It's always the daylight hours divided by 12. So after 6.5 hours is one, which is after midday, after a half hour after midday, is when the mincha gedola starts, and after that one eats the third meal. This loophole of, so to say, of a person not eating bread all the way down to cooked fruits, a lot of people do use, especially like we spoke about last week about those who eat it on the mincha, Shabbos afternoon last week when we can't eat mazonos, although Aaron was kind enough to show us the OU article about eating egg matzah, but that's not everyone's custom. Chabad's minhag is we do not eat at all on the third meal, because we have a verse, Shabbos hayoim loy. The third time it says hayoim, it says loy yiyah. There won't be food there won't be man on the Shabbos. So based on that, there's an idea of not eating food if you're want to get spiritually high. Like we know that the time Mashiach is going to be above eating food, but that's Kabbalistic and mystical. But as far as halacha goes, one is obligated to eat 3 meals, minimum to eat at least fruit on Shabbos afternoon. In Chabad, we eat, those who don't want to eat something, they'll eat fruit for the third meal. Okay, every Jewish man, he says over here, okay, quotes the source, 66 is, you should eat at least like a beitza, size of an egg. So he says, see Shulchan Aruch 291, Magen Avram 2912, holds that the Shabbos meal requires a bit more than a kibetza. So according to the Magen Avram, he says it should be even more than a kibetza, than an egg's worth. Mishnah Berurah agrees, but rules that if time is it rules that if there is no choice, even a kibetza is enough. So the Mishnah Berurah says that one could eat an egg, which is in a case that it's not in a regular situation. When in a regular situation, one should eat more than a egg's worth of bread or of a meal. Okay. He says over here, one should not eat too much in the morning meal in order to have an appetite for the afternoon meal. If you eat when you are too full, it's not considered eating and you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. So here he says, not just a question of you won't have an appetite, but eating al hasayva, eating while you're full, is not fulfilling the mitzvah. So it's not just a question of you're not going to have an appetite, you're just not going to be considered as if you ate the third meal. If eating causes you discomfort, you are not obligated to do so. For the meal is for enjoyment. Again, if the whole point of the meals on Shabbos is about oinig Shabbos. So if eating is this based on that is one of the ideas of some people who have the need to fast on Shabbos, where there's a fast for dreams, that one is not supposed to fast on Shabbos, but if eating gives you discomfort, then there's different, so to say, different halachas about that. Okay, so that ends this law. Let's continue. So we learned how much you have to eat for the meal. It has to be an egg's worth of food. Each of the meal, even the third meal. And in the worst case scenario, you could have cooked vegetables on the third meal. The question is, aside for that, we know that we have what's called lechem mishnah. We have to have 2 loaves of bread. It means not just how much you eat, but how much you break, on what amount of bread you break. So it says, V'chayiv livtsoya b'chol suda shtei kikar shleimus. On Shabbos, one is obligated to break the bread on the meal on 2 whole loaves loaves of bread. Not loaves of bread doesn't have to mean a big loaf of bread, or doesn't have to mean big challah. We know that you could buy in the stores, even in places like UFC in Seattle, you can buy the what's called the little round challahs, the bulkalas, or the hamoitzi challahs that are especially for Shabbos, that are like a challah but very small, which is amount a person could eat in a meal. So like this, you don't have waste, but you have to break on 2 complete loaves. Whatever the size of the loaf is, it has to be at least the size of an egg. And how should you break it? He says, we hold both loaves of bread when you make the hamotzi. So in theory, really, you need 4 loaves of bread. Why? Because the first night you use 2. Let's say you eat 1, and you leave 1 over for the next meal. You don't have to eat both. And if there's an eggs amount in the first one. And then you have the second and the third in the morning meal. And then you have the third and the fourth in the afternoon meal. So you don't need 6 loaves of bread. You could have 4 loaves of bread, because if you leave over the second one for the day. Okay, so he says, you hold them both in your hand, when you make the hamotzi. But say achas, you break into one of them. Barbara was at our class yesterday in the Gemara, that we learned that one has to cut it at the best place where the bread is, the best place to the bread. We learned that from the king Menashe. And one is, the custom is that we indicate with a little sign of the bread knife on the bread before we make the hamotzi. So if you see a person will take the knife, he or she make a little kind of scrape on the bread, make the blessing, and then cut where the scrape was. The noyigim lirshaim besakim, to make a mark with the knife on the bread, the place that you want to cut it. And the reason is in the week, one cuts a little bit of the bread first and then makes the hamotzi, so it should be ready to eat. As the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch wrote in law number in the laws in chapter 41, law 3. On Shabbos, you can't pre-cut the bread. Why? Because we just said you have to have complete loaves to make the bracha on. So therefore, we just make a sign, a reshima. We make a little mark on the bread without actually puncturing the bread. So it remains complete, but you've kind of made it easier to cut by showing where you want to cut it. Therefore, we can't break the bread, so we just make a mark on the bread. So we shouldn't have a hefsek. We shouldn't have a separation from the blessing to the eating. If a person just makes a blessing and then starts looking at the bread, where am I going to cut it? And especially where I have to cut it, like we learned yesterday in the halachas of B'tzia Sapas of breaking the bread. So therefore, that's going to make a separation between the blessing and the eating. So you already pre-planned where you're going to cut it by making a sign. And the idea is not just to make a sign and disregard that sign, but you actually cut where you saw it, where you did it. This obviously doesn't apply to matzah on Pesach. V'yesh lahaniach hakikaris shtei zu shu reitz lipsoya eis lafana k'dei shleitzarach lahavla mitzvah. So which bread do you take first? So we know the halacha is always the one that's closest to you is the one that you use first. This applies to many mitzvahs. The idea of loy lahavra mitzvahs, don't pass over a mitzvah. No pun intended in the holiday of Passover. So we don't pass over a mitzvah. So you go for the first one right away, as opposed to moving something out of the way and taking the next one. So prepare the bread you want to cut, that should be the one most closest to you. And here he adds that this doesn't just apply to a person who eats 3 meals. Even if for whatever reason you eat 5 meals on Shabbos, right? You know the famous story of the yeshiva boy who would eat in everyone's house. So every time you eat, you have to have 2 loaves of bread. Also, if a person is in the eating before the meal, like we said by Kiddush, where you don't have bread, but you have cakes, pas kisanin cakes. So this is another custom. Is that another law? Sorry, is deish lakacha shtaim shtaimus. Kain reisi linug eitz lagodelecha. He writes, this is not everyone agrees with this. That he says, I've seen this by a great gadol, a great person, that when he would take, for instance, let's say at a Kiddush, based on what the Kitzur is writing here, we see the footnotes. But based on what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is writing here, let's say you're at a Kiddush, you would take 2 complete crackers. So if you have, or 2 tam-tams, whatever it is that you're using as your mazonos, not just to take a cracker and eat it, but take 2, like the 2 breads. Okay. Let's see the footnotes on this law. Footnote number 68, I think, is here somewhere. Yes, footnote number 68. I think the last one over there was 67. Yeah, so it's footnote number 68. All right, just gives us the source. So you don't pass over a mitzvah. What does it mean not to pass over a mitzvah? So it says, if you should pass over 1 loaf, it looks as if you are ignoring a potential object of a mitzvah. I mean, say if you're going to pass over the mitzvah, therefore, the same thing applies to men who put on tefillin. The halach is that how we put our tefillin away in the bag is in such a way that the first tefillin that we touch should be the tefillin of the hand, because we put on the tefillin of the hand before we put on the tefillin of the head. So the rabbis have figured out that when a person sticks their right hand, if you're righty, into a bag, you're going to go towards the left. That's just the way it goes, right? You go that way. So therefore, we put our tefillin of the hand in the left of the bag. Like this, you grab it first, and same thing applies with the talis. The talis should be before the tefillin. So you don't take the talis and move it away. Sorry, the tefillin and move it away and put on the talis, because we put on the talis before we put on the tefillin. So much so that if you touch first the head tefillin, maybe you have to put on the head tefillin before you put on the hand tefillin, because you shouldn't pass over a mitzvah. It's disrespectful. Okay, number 70 is what? Okay, source. Now regarding this, hold on, Barbara. Regarding this question about eating 2 crackers or 2 mazonos at a Kiddush, so he says he saw it by an Adam Gadol, by a great person. The footnote quotes the Maharsham, which is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, disagrees. He holds that if you do this, it will indicate that you are having a regular meal, and you'll have to wash se'emotzi and birchas hamazon. So the Maharsham says that not only it's not necessary, but you shouldn't take 2 crackers, because by taking 2 crackers, you're indicating as if this is your regular meal, and therefore it would not suffice by having a cracker, and you would have to wash. So better just make it a casual meal and use the loopholes of mizonos as making it like an established. And actually, when I once saw someone do that, I've never was familiar with this law about taking 2 crackers, or this opinion of the law of taking 2 crackers. And it actually struck me strange when I saw the person taking 2 crackers, because it looked like too established. So the Marsham agrees that he says it's better not to take 2 crackers, because then maybe you're obligated to actually sit down and wash. Yes, Barbara.
I just wanted to verify, you said so long as the challahs that we use are at least the size of an egg, we would still need to use 2 of those, right? So if I'm making small rolls of challah, that's appropriate. I still need to use 2, and I can't break those. I would have to still cut those.
No, I mean you could. When we not every time you take the bread, you could obviously pull pieces once. Different customs. Some people pull it all the time, but when the cutting the bread, the first time when you make the hamotzi, it should be with the cutting, and afterwards people are not less. It's not every time you have to take a knife. As far you don't have to eat both loaves. You can eat 1 loaf and put the one away for the second meal.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's do a few more laws, because I have to go pray the holiday prayer. So it says Yudches, law number 18. This we find the custom. If somebody go to some people's houses, there's different customs. Some people will have the head of the household, or let's say a person's having guests, and or father, what have you, the head of the household will have the 2 loaves, and everyone just takes from what he cuts of the bread. And other people actually have the custom to give every male person or married male person as in a way of kind of honoring their participation in the meal, that they should also have 2 loaves of bread. So here he says like this, gets into the law of it. Let's say not everyone has, it doesn't say men or female, because men or women either of them. Not everyone has 2 loaves of bread. Only one. Like I said, most people have. Again, it's not, I'm not gonna say most, but some people have. Not everyone has the custom of giving 2 loaves of bread of every participant. So let's say there's only one person. He is going to cut and have everyone in mind and exempt them of the requirement of 2 loaves. And also the actual blessing on the bread, they don't have to make the blessing on the bread. They could listen to the blessing that was made by the head of the household and just eat the bread. And the person who's having everyone in mind, don't just quickly grab the bread, the chalas, and cut them with disregard of the people at the table. You want their attention because you are going to include them in the 2 breads and the blessing. So therefore, there's a custom. Not everyone has this custom, but the custom that says in Shulchan Aruch that you say b'shus v'rayrai v'rabbaisai, which is with permission of my teachers and masters, i.e., getting everyone's attention. After first he can't. It's another custom that a lot of people have that is wrong. A lot of people will feel uncomfortable cutting and eating bread while everyone's waiting, right? If you put 2 breads in front of everyone, so then that's fine, because then you feel everyone just cuts into their own bread. But if you're the one who's cutting the bread for everyone, a lot of people feel uncomfortable. It's not polite for me to start eating. I should first cut the whole challah up, send it to everyone, and then I'll also eat. But that's not the way it's done, because then you're separating the blessing from and I've seen a lot of people just really uncomfortable with this, but this is the law. And therefore it says, after the one who breaks and has everyone in mind tastes from the bread to connect the eating of the bread to the blessing, then afterwards, nice and then you give the bread. Now I've heard many it's interesting, of all the things in the meal, the bread is one of the statements of respect and acknowledgement of people at the table. It means who gets first. It's not just casual. If you have a parent at your table, or if you're cutting on behalf of your wife, the custom is you give your wife before you give anyone else. I've heard radio shows talking about how even people should make sure to give age of your children. If you have a few children at the table, go with the older child first to get the bread first. How we give out the bread is also a respectful way of acknowledging the people at the table. Again, not in a way that offends others. You have to be careful. I've actually sat at a table where the husband's father was always at the table because he was eating at his children's home. He lived in the same city, and was always a guest at his children's home. And he always gave his father before he gave his wife, and his wife was offended by that. So you have to always work out how that works. But there is an idea of how you distribute the bread also should be in a respectful way. Okay, so he says that if only one of them has 2 loaves, he should break into 2 loaves. See Eshel Avram, that this applies even when the others have not yet washed their hands, so he could have them in mind. Okay, that's a good question. That's a good point. Meaning, do you wait? This is also one of the bread. Always the most important part of something is always where there's the most tension. That's just the way it works, right? The shul, everyone's nervous. So the eating of the bread usually at the meal is a kind of stop talking, everyone wash, let's sit down at the table. You can continue your conversation. People keep people waiting while they're waiting. So the whole idea is, so how long do you have to wait? So if someone's not coming to the table for whatever reason, the whole community, the whole table doesn't have to wait for that person. So you could cut the bread even if they haven't washed yet, and they've eaten from a bread that was 2 loaves. And that also, each person has to use common sense. When I got smicha, when I got my rabbinic ordain, I was told by the one who was teaching me, was a student from the old country, from Europe. So he said that there's the concept of the 5th Shulchan Aruch. The 5th Shulchan Aruch means that the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is divided into 4 categories, but there's the fifth category, which is common sense, meaning sometimes you just have to be smart. So also over here, just to be aggressive and not wait for someone because you're nervous or hungry. So there's common sense of when you do wait and when you don't wait. Those things are common sense. And also both sides have to be considerate not to keep other people waiting. Okay. So in footnote number 73, he says, you should give everyone after you eat the bread. So he says, then you give the bread out. Magen Avram, according to the Ramah and Taz, the others should be given the bread first. So it's not so clean cut. It's not that everyone agrees with this. This is the law that the Shulchan Aruch takes, which is according to the Magen Avram. But according to the Ramah and the Taz, first give everyone else and then you eat the bread. Okay. Because it's not considered really a hefsek because you're in the middle of engaging in it. All right, we're going to stop here because we're going to move on. We'll finish off the rest of the laws next week after Pesach. If there's any questions, now would be a good time to ask. No? Okay, perfect. Well,
Wait, Rabbi, actually,
go
I
ahead.
have a question. A little bit connected to what you talked about tonight. Are you supposed to, I think I learned that you're supposed to dip the challah in the salt rather than like pour the salt on the challah. Is that correct?
Yes, that's our custom. We dip it 3 times in the. He hasn't brought it here, and I don't believe he will, but he hasn't brought. That's the minhag. Yes, we always dip salt
So,
in.
so what do you do with matzah? You dip it in?
That's a good question that some people are careful because some people are very careful with matzah about gebrachs. Gebrachs means we don't want any liquids or any foods on the matzah, so it shouldn't, in case the matzah isn't completely cooked, although most matzah is burnt, but we're very careful not to dip our matzah in any liquids, especially water, on Pesach. That's not everyone's custom, but that's gebrachs is something
Let's
that.
say you're not matzah on gebrach, then what do you do with the matzah and the salt?
But still, most people for sure you have to dip the matzah in the matzah in the salt because you have to have salt. We don't eat bread without salt. But yeah, in every scenario you would dip the matzah in the salt.
But even though the matzah is not gonna like retain the salt, like if you were to sprinkle the salt on, it's more likely it would stay on the salt. I guess that doesn't matter. It's more like
Yeah, but there's
what
also
they
ways.
say.
It could be you're right. I have to check, but there's also ways you could kind of do a little scoop.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Laila Tov, everyone. Good shot. Good Moed. Good Shabbos. Good Yom Tov. And
Thank you,
hope
Rabbi.
go back after the Chag. Take care and Laila Tov.
Thank
Bye.
you.